So there's some bad news for Donald Trump. Now, according to a new poll, nearly 2/3 of Americans now disapprove of the job the president is doing in the White House. To that I say, sad. Now, 64% of respondents, according to this survey, said that they do not like how the president is handling his office, while just over a third, 35%, approved of the way the president is doing his job. So that's a bit of a disaster. So now you might be asking, why do 2/3 of Americans feel this way? Well, there are several different answers to that. Now, number one, apparently, is Donald Trump's lack of respect for American institutions. Well, that's interesting. Now, a full 65% of Americans believe that Trump has little or no respect for the country's democratic institutions and traditions. That's very interesting. Only about 34% said they believe he has a great deal or even a fair amount of respect for such institutions. Now, broken down by political affiliation, you are not going to be surprised that most Republicans disagree with that. Now, while that sentiment appeared most common among Democrats and independents, 9 in 10 and 6 in 10 respectively, a third of Republican voters said Trump had little or no respect for democratic institutions in America. That means 2/3 are like, yeah, no, he has total respect. In fact, you haven't seen this level of respect. The level of respect Donald Trump has for democratic institutions will make your head spin. So much. So great. The American institutions, Trump, so great. Now, what do you mean by disrespect for institutions? Well, let's take the court for one. Well, that's an American institution. That's a democratic institution, right? Now, Donald Trump, he's been known for going after judges that have disagreed with him. Judges that have blocked some of his policies. For example, the Muslim ban. They continue. The Muslim, it's been blocked about 3 different times. So, ironically, and actually, it really speaks to the system of checks and balances that we have in America, that Donald Trump continues to get stopped and his most egregious policies get blocked by the courts. So again, a point for American democracy for actually having these good checks and balances to somebody who is doing things that is wildly unconstitutional. So now, not only that, right? When it comes to policy, a lot of people are disagreeing with the stuff that he's attempting to do. Now, one of the policy positions that is getting such disapproval is healthcare. 66% of Americans said that they disapprove of Trump's handling of healthcare. Now, the bill that recently passed the House, Trump Care, right, is deeply unpopular with most of the American people. And as I've explained on numerous occasions, it's nothing more than a gigantic tax cut for the wealthiest Americans, while having the effect of throwing 23 million people off their insurance and possibly raising premiums for people who are older and people with pre-existing conditions, essentially pricing them out of the market. So it's definitely not the plan that he campaigned on in 2016, and of course will end up hurting a lot of Americans. Now, not only that, but I think what will be surprising to a lot of people is that 64% of respondents to this poll disapprove of Donald Trump and his climate change policies. Now, the president announced earlier this month that he would withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And he's made a concerted effort to roll back Obama-era environmental regulations. Doing so, of course, rolling back these executive orders, which he's able to do without Congress. Now, the thing about that makes him so unpopular for doing that is that most Americans ended up approving of that deal. They actually want to stay in the Paris Climate Accord. Now, according to a May Huffington Post YouGov poll, 61% of Americans said that they wanted to stay in the deal, while 21% were unsure of whether or not they should stay in the deal. Now, back in January, of course, speaking of environmental regulation, speaking of the environment, there's another poll that talked about the powers of the EPA, and this was back in January. 60% of Americans, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll, did not want the EPA to be cut. They actually wanted the EPA's powers to be expanded, or at least kept the same. Now, that doesn't mean defunded, which he is trying to do with his budget. calling for massive cuts to the Environmental Protection Program, as well as him changing the agency into an agency that doesn't actually protect the environment. And that's, of course, under the stewardship of Scott Pruitt. Now, it turns out that Americans are kind of unhappy when you mess with our clean air and clean water. And people want a strong EPA to enforce the rules against dumping and pollution. There's a reason that we had an EPA, and that's because at a certain point, LA was completely filled with smog, and we could light rivers on fire. We really don't want to go back to that, do we? No, I certainly don't. I think most of the American people don't. But there are companies out there that don't care whether or not they pollute the streams or the rivers or the air, as long as they can make an extra buck. That's why we actually have to have a strong enforcement agency to enforce some of these rules. Now, can regulations get redundant? Sure. That's why you have to periodically go, and this is my idea, review regulations to see whether or not they're actually effective at doing what they're supposed to do, which is making sure that the environment is well taken care of, that we are good stewards to the environment. And unfortunately, Donald Trump's like, no. Donald Trump and the EPA under Scott Pruitt are more interested now in protecting the profits of for-profit corporations than actually protecting the people and the environment that they're supposed to protect. Now, anyway, and look, they're doing that because, for one, of course, it's good for money, right? They get a lot of donations from, especially Scott Pruitt, getting a lot of donations from oil and gas interests. And Donald Trump had once owned a stake in Energy Transfer Partners, which, of course, is the company that created built the Keystone XL pipeline. I'm sorry, the Dakota Access Pipeline. So, they want to roll back these regulations for the money. And, of course, Donald Trump himself admitted to not even believing in climate change. Pruitt's also a bit of a climate denier. And turns out that, look, Americans are kind of pissed. They actually want us to do something about the environment. They don't want the government making it easier for corporations to destroy the environment by rolling back some of these regulations. So that's what you have. That's some of the main reasons that were asked in this survey of why people are so angry with the Donald Trump administration. Now, 64% approval rating, though. Jesus Christ. Trump is the most unpopular president, and he is still dropping like a stone. And out of the previous 3 presidents, and this is an interesting fact, including Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, Bush is the only other president who reached 60% disapproval. However, why Trump stands out is that Trump has reached a record far faster, far quicker. You know what it took for President Bush to hit 60%? First, it took quite a few years, right? He didn't just start out at 60%. He actually started out with quite a bit of political capital, despite basically stealing the election from Al Gore. He said, "Hey, my compassionate conservatism. Well, we're gonna be compassionate conservatives." And then, of course, you got this boost from the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, of course, 9/11, and then he pissed it away. So, eventually getting himself down to 60%, and one of the main drivers of that, of course, is the Hurricane Katrina, which was a complete debacle for George W. Bush. And he even got down to 71% in his last year of office. So, look, Bush was incredibly unpopular. And for a while, we thought, we cannot get somebody more unpopular than Donald Trump. Or, I'm sorry, than George W. Bush. It looks like it will be Donald Trump. We'll see. After all, Trump's been in office for 5 months, and he's already at 64% disapproval. He's breaking records, man. And I guess in a way, he's kind of winning at becoming the most disliked president in modern history at such a breakneck record pace. Sad. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.